y'all for coming out today. We are here to talk about the very important topic of outdoor live entertainment. It is something our organization has been working on for nearly 4 years now. We're thankful for any form of engagement at this point in the game for folks to be able to come out. Definitely for us as an organization, we are all about being able to provide clear and concise information. If you have not signed in at the entrance, there is a table with an FAQ sheet which may answer some of your questions, but we are also here for y'all to answer or ask questions, I should say. So this is why you're here. In addition to that, for folks, I'd like to be able to say there are no stupid questions. This is a very in-depth and very verbose topic at the end of the day, I will say that. So with that being said, there are no stupid questions. If you do have questions and do not feel like asking those questions verbally, I have these wonderful note cards, and I'm going to put those in the back by the sign up with some pens. So if you have questions, you don't want to ask them, feel free to write your name, phone number, and email, as well as that question. I'll also have a little receptacle at the table back there. You can fold it up, throw it in there, and then leave it myself. Or my colleague, Ellestad of MaCCNO, will get to you either via email or phone and answer those questions. So I will be putting those back there shortly. And then give y'all a quick run of show. So you will hear from myself very briefly. I don't want to go on too much of a tangent. We have a gentleman to my left, Tuozzolo, Council President in Moreno's office, the Chief of Staff. My colleague and our Executive Director, Ellestad of MaCCNO, Alexis, the Operation Director for this wonderful venue. We are at Zony Mash Beer Project. I'm going to give it up for the venue, And then last but certainly not least, one of my favorite people in New Orleans, the metro area, Arsène. So I'll be doing intros and facilitating. We also have, there's a mic somewhere on the other side of this rig, I think, for questions. Oh, yeah, right there. So that's where you will ask those questions of the folks that are up here when we get to that point. As I said, there's also going to be a receptacle in the back. So just to give folks, I guess, a very, very brief overview. As I mentioned already, we've been doing this work for almost 4 years now. As I think a lot of us in this room know and understand, we're dealing with B4 and B5 variants during, as I like to call it, this pain city salmon as it ranges on over the last 2 years. So with that being said, outdoor live entertainment is something that is very, very important for all of New Orleans at the end of the day, regardless if you're a cultural community member, regardless if you're a service industry worker, regardless if you're a small business, or a resident, right? I think at the end of the day, if we all have the opportunity to be able to participate, observe, and enjoy outdoor live entertainment and do it in a very safe and healthy way, as well as it being an economic incubator for our small businesses, as well as our cultural community members. At the end of the day, it all works out. So with that also being said, we want to make sure that folks know, and this may help answer some questions. This does not deal with street performance. This does not deal with Black masculine Indian traditions, and it does not deal with associated pleasure club second level. So just kind of wanted to clear the air from that standpoint. Outdoor live entertainment does not deal with any of those things. And then to close, just wanted to also note, in regards to the legalization of outdoor live entertainment, at the end of the day, we have certainly heard, and I'm sure some people have, I'll say that, I'm going to say to some degree, COVID is over, right? I don't necessarily agree with that. So with that being said, we need to be able to have some form of entertainment, some form of cultural practice and activity for our musical culture to be able to take place. And we believe that outdoor live entertainment does that. It has to go through an approval process. So this is not the end-all, be-all. This is something where folks have the opportunity to continuously engage in this topic when it comes to small businesses that would like to have outdoor live entertainment in your neighborhoods and in your communities. And what was my last thing? I'll leave it at that. I may have to come back with more, but I will pass things over to Ethan to give y'all a brief overview of where we are and then how we actually got to this point. So I'll give it up for Ethan Ellestad.
I was putting my beer, so I'm already doing pretty good. So Renard gave us a little brief background about sort of how long we've been doing this, what we we got to this point and what this ordinance isn't. But one thing I want to start with is what this ordinance does deal with. Because we talk about a lot in the context of just being outdoor music, but in fact this is about outdoor live entertainment. And live entertainment, if you go to the zoning ordinance, is not just music. It is theater, it is dance, it is stand-up comedy, it is DJs, it is magic shows. All those things are included in what live entertainment includes, so all those things are affected by this ordinance in the outdoor space. And I think it's really important to note, because a lot of those things people don't necessarily equate together, and they don't realize that if these restrictions and if these regulations are not approved, all those things would also not be allowed in outdoor spaces. They would have to be specifically in fully enclosed spaces with all doors and windows closed at all times, which, as Renard has talked about, during the pandemic, that is not the ideal, right? We need to have this in these open spaces. We need to create a way for that to continue. Renard also talked about the length of time we've been working on this. As you know, that is before the pandemic started. To give you some background, we first learned that there was a decision made by someone in city government that outdoor live entertainment was not allowed in businesses and many institutions citywide, and that was because there's a requirement in the zoning ordinance that said doors and windows must be closed during all live performances. They wanted that to say that during any performance, doors and windows must be closed. There are no doors and windows that exist outside. Therefore, you can't close them because they don't exist. Therefore, outdoor live entertainment cannot be held. Though we dispute that reading, because I think anybody largely would think that doesn't make sense, they decided that that was legally what they were going to go with. And so since that time, they have basically been slowly telling businesses they cannot hold it without really ever announcing it. That came to light in 2019, about 6 months before the pandemic, because there was a proposal to limit outdoor music and dining in some of the sort of riverside neighborhoods, Tremaine, Bridgwater, Moreno. There was a proposal to limit outdoor music and dining. During that process, which we opposed, but during that process, it came to light that they'd already made the restriction on outdoor live entertainment years ago. They just never told everybody. And so obviously that's problematic, but then the pandemic hit, right? And everything kind of changed. And what the city did, and this is to the credit of the city and the administration, is they created these temporary permits that allow outdoor live entertainment at businesses, specifically during COVID. And that's why you see all these businesses that pop up. This being one, you see it, BJ's, you see Broadside, you see the space that they've been allowing music in outdoor spaces. The problem with those permits is that they are going away. We don't know exactly when or if they've been rescinded, but they will be rescinded at some point, which means once those are rescinded, then outdoor live entertainment once again basically is not allowed anywhere in New Orleans, which again is really problematic. And so that's why we've been working through this process to figure out a way that we can work citywide to allow these spaces to continue, but also do it in a way that can support the businesses, support the musicians, support the service industry workers, support the sound techs, all the people that are involved within sort of this ecosystem of cultural space, but also in a way that can work with neighborhoods as well. Because a lot of these places are local serving, and they are neighborhoods, and we want to make sure they can coexist. And the way to do that is to have fair regulations that work for the businesses, that work for the musicians, and that neighbors know what they are and can interact with. A little bit more into the specifics of the ordinance, but that's really what this is about, is to create a way to let it coexist, that this can continue in a way that really does work for everyone. Because the last thing I'll say before I pass on is that right now it's basically unclear for everyone. Right? We don't know when these permits are going to end. Often there will be regulations vary business by business. Often the businesses are unclear how long the permit extends or how long the entertainment, so that actually creates conflict. And so what this will also do is not just create these cultural spaces, this economic drivers, public health priority, it will also create some regulatory certainty for everyone within and without the spaces. So listen. Right.
So I know another issue is crime actually has something that no resources just not trying to raise their resources because that's the go back to information.
So could we decriminalize everything and make sure that it is, also, when we get to a little more into enforcement as we go on the line, I think that there is going to be. Right, and I think that's something that Anthony will talk about a little bit down the line. So, yes, we are going to talk about the ways to be enforced in a way that is not repeated in a criminal offense, right? So make sure that it's done in a way that's getting people in compliance, not cracking down and typically all the rest of it. Right? So we'll get to a little bit of that, and then I'm going to pass to Arsène to tell you a little about being a living musician in this aspect.
Hi, y'all. So, I've been kind of on the front lines of the public health issue of this as a working musician who probably used to see quite a bit. You don't see as much anymore because I have a pre-existing condition, asthma, and I take care of a lot of people who, if they caught COVID, they could possibly die. So, I'm really for this because what I have witnessed in the last 2 years, and what I've also experienced too, is that being able to play outdoors is the safest space for everyone involved. As musicians, we are high risk. What we do when we are singing, when we are, especially anybody who plays wind instruments or anything like that, we are at high risk, and we have the ability to become super spreaders. And I just want to do that. Also, a lot of musicians, as of now, are experiencing multiple reinfections. And what's happening is their overall health is deteriorating. And it doesn't have to be that way. Because when it comes to our individual health, everyone is actually involved, especially in this kind of issue. Nobody needs to be getting this. Nobody needs to be getting reinfected. It's, aside from the topical issues of it being incredibly inconvenient as far as messing up availability for people to work and to provide for their families, it also is causing serious health consequences, and I've seen it across the board for the last 2 years. So that's why I've been here joining this fight to get this passed and sharing those experiences of what I have seen over the last 2 years. During that 2 years, I created the Making Groceries program. I was also almost the former director and program manager of it. You might be familiar because there's a beer that was inspired by it. And in that, I was taking care of some of our most vulnerable musicians, some of our most vulnerable culture bearers, and even on the mental health side of things, you know, people who aren't able to do what they were put here to do deteriorate. And I've also watched that happen too. And the real fact of the matter is that we don't have to live like this, and it does not have to be this way. But in order for us to get to that point, we need community engagement from everyone.
I'm Zony. I'm the founding member of Help Focus Place, Pages Bathrooms, and direct operations. And I think Ethan was talking about the short-term sort of outdoor entertainment permits that the city allowed during the pandemic. And I think that made us a case study because we were able to sort of try it out and find out that actually it worked. The effect it had for us was that we were able to keep our staff employed, granted less hours, but they were employed. We were able to put musicians and other performers as well, actually.
I was able to work safely. I didn't get sick. Great.
We hired the sound engineer from House Police was out of work, and he came and did sound for us. And so we were able to kind of spread the wealth. We also incubated 3 food pop-ups, but I know that's another kind of worms. They're now opening their brick and mortar. So, we also through the process got to know our city council, and the bigger part is we also got to know our neighbors. And it was a really good, positive process. I mean, I'm sure we made them mad along the way, but we learned what their concerns were. We worked with them. They have our personal cell phone numbers. They can contact us if there's an issue we address it. So through that whole process, and that's something about enforcement that I know we can't guarantee with people, but to be able to forge relationships with our neighbors alleviated some of the need for enforcement, because when they were pissed off, they would call us and we would address it. And so that was a helpful thing. I think the biggest challenge we had was just getting communication from the city and understanding the rules, and seeing neighbors down the street seeming to have a different set of rules than we had, and not knowing sort of, we have been told by one department that the outdoor permits have sunsetted, but we've been told by others that they have not. So we don't know, and to be fair, this is an unprecedented time. Maybe the city, they might not know themselves. But I think it's such an important thing to have a common ground of a set of rules that the venues know, the performers know, and it's, in my opinion, empowering for the residents and community to know too, because we do have a nighttime economy. This is an urban area. Tourists come for it, but it's also largely why people live here, because it ought to take part of that nighttime economy, and we can't just, expect it to live by the same rules that we have in the daytime. So we have to find some way to move forward so everybody knows their rules and everybody can move forward together.
Thanks everyone for having me tonight. I appreciate keeping the community, the cultural community, helping have these meetings. This is probably my maybe 12th, 13th community meeting on this subject in the last few weeks. And whether by Zoom or phone conference or in person even, we've had really high level engagement across the city, because ultimately setting rules for things like this need to be really specifically community tailored to neighborhoods, tailored to the needs of the cultural community, tailored to the needs of the neighbors. And so what we're endeavoring to do, as Ethan kind of stepped back and showed us the history here, is a few years ago there was a study done by the City Planning Commission that sort of recommended some potential opportunities to do outdoor live music. Then the pandemic hit and outdoor live music bloomed, just like outdoor dining bloomed, outdoor live entertainment, I should say. And so by these things blooming in this sort of unusual pandemic time, we saw sort of a lot of ad hoc arrangements, and arrangements that are arbitrary, where rules are not well understood by neither the community nor the venues or the musicians even. So one of the things we're trying to do basically this entire year, we're nowhere near out of the pandemic, but we are trying to formalize some of these sort of new opportunities for our community to do some of the traditional things we've always done, but in a little bit of a new way. And so there's 3 real sort of basic values that we're trying to achieve. I'm sorry to introduce myself. Andrew Tuozzolo from Council President Moreno's office, as they mentioned before. And so we're the main sponsor of this. We've asked City Planning earlier this year to take that sort of study, or a version of that study, off the shelf, take a first phase of it, and give us some good recommendations about what we should do to set these rules for outdoor live entertainment. And so what we have in front of us are really guided by 3 main values, one being predictability. Predictability is super important for not just the community, which it is. Everyone who lives near anything in New Orleans and everyone who lives near everything in New Orleans need to have predictability about what's going on in their neighborhood, in their community. What's also important about predictability is for venue owners, for locations. It's very hard to book a venue if you have to run down to City Hall and get an arbitrarily, in some ways, issued permit for something that you have or have not been doing. We want to create guidelines that create that predictability so that everyone understands what's going on. The other thing we want to do is make sure there's an accountability mechanism. As Ethan mentioned, the last thing, I know my boss has been very, very upfront about this, is that we want NOPD to be doing a whole lot less if it doesn't have to do with violent crime. One of the things we want NOPD to do is focus on violent crime. What we don't want NOPD to focus on is a whole lot of other stuff where the use of a law enforcement officer really doesn't add to the situation. And so we've asked for civilianization in a number of ways. There are 6 things we've asked for about NOPD, to reform NOPD, to reorient it, and we're hopeful along the lines of the work we're doing here is to get a lot of the ideas around accountability out of the law enforcement lens and into lenses that make more sense, to not criminalize behavior, but to make sure that there are rules that are followed, that are enforced, but we're not relying on NOPD to be there because we need them working on the things that they're best at, which is dealing with violent crime. So on the accountability measure, we want to create clear, defined, binary rules that make sense, that are enforceable, that everyone can understand, that don't require special equipment or special information to do. We want to make a binary sort of situation so that people understand is it right or wrong.
What exactly are the rules? We're here to hear the rules, not what you count on.
We're not going to explain this.
I need the rules.
Yeah, we're not going to explain
We need the rules.
So the last thing we want to make sure we have is an opportunity to support expression. So supporting expression of the cultural community is extremely important. So those are the things that are guiding us. So if you'd like me to get to the point, I'm happy to get to the point, is that one of the things we're creating is a motion to direct the law department, city planning folks to create a conditional use process for venues. So we're doing location and time specific rules for venues so that venues have an opportunity to engage with their community. The conditional use process, I don't want to get into the process stuff, but basically allows for a pretty deep community engagement to kind of make a conversation happen between neighbors, between venues, between musicians and the cultural community, and define for every specific space across the city. And we think there may be 40 or 50 spaces that are doing outdoor live entertainment right now. Each space is different. Zony is different from a space in the Treme, different from a space in the Bridgwater, different from a space in Gentilly or Uptown. There are so many different spaces in this community. We want to make sure that rules are not one size fit all, but allow for a community engagement process and tailor them to each location. And the rules that we're describing are ones that sort of identify locations, identify times, and provide a number of predictable times a week that outdoor live entertainment will happen. And along with that, a submission in the front end of a venue giving some plans around how that would happen. Plans around how the orientation of the entertainment would be, how far they are from a border, a residential border, how they would submit, for example, a sound abatement plan. All of these things would be submitted in advance, not on an ad hoc basis, but in advance to create a predictable long-term access to outdoor live entertainment, not just the short-term ad hoc way. And I'm happy to open to questions, but I want to make sure I got that out. So as Ethan pointed out, there's no effect on any of the spontaneous culture, any of the second line culture, any of the street culture. This is all about venues, about long-term opportunities, and about community engagement and a conditional use process that gives each venue access to a predictable set of rules for their venue for outdoor live entertainment. I can give more, but it sounds like people want to talk about questions, so I'm happy to take them.
A couple of questions to follow up.
Hey y'all, before we get the questions right quick, and there's a microphone there, and I don't have a problem bringing that around to everybody. I want to give a very quick introduction for this gentleman in front of me. This is Frank Southall of Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative and the Renters' Right Assembly. I think at the end of the day, as members of MaCCNO, I want to say that specifically, as MaCCNO being a member of the Healthy Homes Coalition, is certainly important to make sure that we're talking about the intersectionality between health, between outdoor live entertainment, and then healthy housing at the end of the day. They have some work going on in regards to the Healthy Homes Ordinance, so we're going to give Frank very brief little time to kind of talk about that and talk about that intersectionality when we think about health, when we think about culture, when we think about healthy housing, and how all of those things intersect at the end of the day. And then if you have questions, I will be putting my mask on and running around to y'all to get those questions answered by everybody up here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My apologies for being late. As Renard mentioned again, my name is Southall. I'm the Organizing Community Engagement Manager at Jane Place. I'm also a member of the Renters' Rights Assembly. So when we think about this issue of the intersection between health, culture, and housing, I think most people go like, duh, like, culture can't happen if the people who create the culture don't live in the places where the culture is produced. But oftentimes, housing is overlooked as an issue as it relates to protecting our culture bearers, our musicians, our artists. And so that's one of the reasons why we proudly support any ordinance that expands music and art and culture bearer opportunities for people. Any opportunities that pay musicians and artists and other people to produce culture work a fair share of their production. In part because we know and we've seen via our research and policy work, organizing work, that many of the people who produce the culture, many people who play the drums on Frenchmen Street, many of our artists who are making the murals, many of photographers, can't afford to live in the places they're either from, or that they've lived at for, some folks a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, generations of families, So that's why it's really important that we protect affordable housing, especially for our culture bearers and musicians and artists, by any means necessary. I mean, any policy the city can enact that increases housing, that protects these folks, is something we will always support. If it's a real policy that actually does real work, that protects people, or expands affordable housing for the people, we will support it. That being said, as Renard mentioned, we have a Healthy Homes Coalition. There's like over 20 member organizations. Some of y'all probably already know Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, Mind Blank, just can't remember other organizations. Lots of good organizations. You can go to a website, healthyhomesnola.org. But I just want to briefly talk about why we protect our musicians, culture bearers, and artists. One of the things about is registering all rental properties to ensure a basic standard of habitability. That means that our rental units should have air conditioning units. Most people don't realize in the state of Louisiana, your rental unit does not have to have any type of cooling device by law. It just has to be able to stay above 60 degrees by law. So we want to get that bare minimum in. We want to get minimums in around, habitability standards as relates to black mold, along with a couple other things. We want a proactive health and safety inspection program for apartment buildings, because we know that many of the apartment buildings folks are living in are filled with different issues. Everyone has a story of a friend, a cousin, a loved one who lives in a big apartment complex where they're dealing with horrible conditions. A landlord lives in New York. It's a wrap. And so we're going to stop that. And mainly one of the things we want to do that really connects to this community, we know a lot of our musicians, culture bearers, are small landlords. Often they are housing other family members, friends, sometimes people in their band. And so what we want to do is create a small program to support small landlords to bring their units up to code without penalizing them. Sometimes the code enforcement can go after a working class homeowner, can lead to displacement. A lot of us saw that after a storm, especially folks who live in places like Forret, Makin, Central City. We saw a lot of that happening with working class homeowners who are being fined out the wazoo because of their inability to maintain their property up to the city standards. We want to change that and move the city into a role of helping people. So as part of our small landlord program, we want to create a low-cost loan program, low interest loan program, as well as talk with the city about providing grants to small working class landlords, folks who have 4 units or less, generally they live on the property, so that they can update their property. And so these are things that we're thinking of, right? How can we better service our musicians, culture bearers, artists? So if you as an individual are interested in getting involved with this, we have meetings the last Wednesday of the month. If your organization is interested, You can also sign up. I think we did a Facebook post today, in the Instagram post and the Renard Strike Assembly, so you can find the link there. Or just come talk to me, and I can give you more of the nitty-gritty of what this ordinance will be about. But yeah, thank you all for allowing me to speak, and apologies for being late again.
All right, y'all, we're gonna go to questions. So also just wanted to mention that the Healthy Homes ordinance that Frank mentioned, there's some handouts at the table at the front as well, if you want to take that on your way out. And whoever has questions, feel free to holler at me, and I will bring you the mic and we can find out more information. Any questions?
Really don't want this to go the way of the short-term rental, okay? Obviously, people are coming in and using it. Those of us who live in the neighborhoods are the ones putting up. I had to put up an Airbnb that was until 3 o'clock in the morning. The guys were from California. Now, I spoke to Andrew, and I'm absolutely great supporter. I love the musicians. I support our local musicians. I go to Broadside, love it. I've been here. But I don't want anyone next to me. Some guy comes from California, buys a commercial property, and decides he's going to play music 24 hours.
So I have some good news on that. Unlike the failed effort to enforce our short-term rental ordinance, which, as good or bad it wasn't enforced, and led to a lot of issues. What we're proposing would not allow, for example, a residence that is a short-term rental to get a conditional use to do outdoor live entertainment at all. I want to point out something, I think Ethan pointed this out, but for people who think this is for backyard parties or quinceañeras or whatever, graduation parties or anything at a residence, that's not what this is about. This is about existing venues, or maybe someone who would develop a new venue seeking a conditional use, which is a land use zoning process. It's not something you go down to City Hall to fill out a form and get. It requires a deep community engagement and requirement that you come up with a lot of stuff that shows that you're trying to play by the rules. And it's not like a short-term rental permit where you kind of just present a sort of a simple kind of form, register it on a website, and go on by your way back to California. This is something that you're going to really need to have deep engagement on, and it's not going to be easy necessarily to get. It's not simple, but I think it's going to be straightforward, and it's going to be attainable, and it's going to create predictability. And most important, I didn't mention this because I wanted to start to get through questions. One of the pieces of this that we're going to require is that there be a transparent sort of website that unlike now when you're looking for provisos or conditional uses, you're using the city's one-stop. I'm not going to get into the zoning stuff, but most people don't find things very easily on that. Our intention or will be that we create a one-stop website that just has the listing of all of the outdoor live entertainment venues and the associated rules in one place. Not a place that you have to go all over the website, but one place. And I'm so glad that Howie Kaplan is here, and I'm going to, he said he'd find me if I mentioned his name any more times, but eventually, very soon, we'll have an Office of Nighttime Economy, and that's one of the best places I think we can start housing some of this information, not just for residents, certainly for residents, but also for venue owners, to say, look, my rules are posted right here. Here's what the rules are. Here's how I'm complying with the rules. And again, our rules are intended to be binary so that it's time and frequency dependent. So it doesn't, you don't have to guess how many times someone had outdoor live entertainment. You don't have to guess what time it is. It only requires a watch. And that's one of the things I think makes things easier. If you make things easier to enforce, they're more likely to be enforced.
Andrew, my name's Stephen Adams. I live right by London Park. We have this is not to go against the grain of meetings, but it does play into musicians and trying to raise money for these guys. You may be familiar with Laurel Street Music, our organization, which we put together during COVID because musicians could not play indoors, much less anybody else be indoors. We started that as a way to raise money for the musicians. There was no profit involved. It was basically all donations. I think we raised over $40,000 in a year for musicians, basically out of the pockets of ourselves and our neighbors. The thing that I'm struggling with, and you mentioned, community engagement. We've tried to play by the rules after we broke the rules, and there are plenty of groups like us that are still doing it.
and I would never even bring them to the surface because I think that they should be doing. I understand that we have a rule book that we play by. 4 or 5 separate attempts. We've accepted that we'll close the street, we'll get police details, we'll pay whatever we have to pay to have these performers. And if we do that, right out the gate, we're paying $1,000 a show before we pay musicians any money to play. I understand that this is a neighborhood, and to your point, we set times, and you all acknowledge that. You said, well, you're doing something really good. You're playing between the hours of noon and 5 o'clock. We intend to keep it that way. What else do we do if we're trying to check every box and we still can't get granted to do it? And I know that there were several people who complained. I think probably less than 5. I think it was 3.
Yep.
And let me finish my point real quick, if you don't mind. Can we go around and knock on every door within a 10-block area and petition to allow you guys to grant us to do this? Because if it's 5 out of 1,000, I have a problem with that. This neighborhood, it has brought so many people together. We've discussed crime issues, and we're now a 501c3. We're open for grants. We're at the point to where if we can get enough money flowing into this, we're going to add money and nights to our private patrol, just as a benefit to do this. The neighbors love it. The musicians love it. The musicians are probably making more than they're making at a nightclub on average. I'm sorry, I didn't. Go ahead.
So maybe I should make a confession. Not only are we neighbors, but I've attended, probably even shouldn't say this. I've seen people in the audience that I've seen attend your porch concerts. One of the things I want to point out about what we're trying to do is just a phased approach that specifically talks about the venues and talks about the on the front end community engagement process. And look, I think one of the problems you're highlighting is the arbitrariness and sort of the Wild West sort of circumstance that the pandemic brought, that the lack of like clear rules, that like a sort of a zoning ruling kind of made this Wild West. And what we're trying to do is close the frontier on this and create very clear rules in this one use case around venues. Appreciate that what we're trying to do probably won't affect or change one way or another what y'all are trying to do. But I think what you can notice is that almost every one of the circumstances that has been brought forward has bloomed, in essence, through the pandemic. I think what we've been trying to do is create guidelines and standardize and create transparency and predictability about these sort of things that have happened. And all I would say to you is that I think creating more outdoor live entertainment opportunities that are permanent and predictable, they ultimately not only just help people musicians, they help musicians be booked far into the future in ways that temporary and special event permits just don't do. While I appreciate and I think that there will be opportunities, and I think we'll be happy to work continuously to find a mechanism that engages communities and gives you guys a fair hearing. This particular process is really about venues and about location-based. And you point out exactly right that time-based restrictions are popular. People understand them. They understand when or when not. And that's what we want to create for venues. And I think if we can create a working model around venues, it first of all depressurizes the circumstance where no one knows what the rules are, but also creates opportunities for people to say, hey, this ain't that bad. For the 5 people that you highlight that are complaining, if you can create circumstances that make them feel more comfortable, I think it helps everybody. Look, we're not going to make everybody happy, but I ultimately think this community broadly agrees that employing musicians, having music in the air is as important as breathing air in the world. And we need, it's what the city is about, and I say music, but entertainment broadly. And I think if we don't have that, if we don't make the rules clear, if we don't create transparency, if we don't have predictability, if we just let the Wild West reign, it decays all the opportunities that we have to make this stuff work. So our view is to try to make it work, and to make it work in a simple way that respects communities, but also ultimately it makes this stuff play forever, right? We want the music to go on forever.
So I want to quick respond to your point about Airbnbs.
I'd love to have Arsène. I'd love to have her play music and sing next to my phone. Anytime of the day. Anytime.
So one thing that this ordinance does not do is it does not is to allow live entertainment outdoors in places where we're not going to be allowed indoors. So you already can have live entertainment at Airbnbs. You're not supposed to have parties, right? You're not supposed to have more than basically, obviously, the enforcement issue, but it wouldn't all of a sudden open up all Airbnbs to be able to do it. They still would not be able to do it, so it would still be an enforcement issue from a different perspective. That's one thing that I also had heard about the specifics of what this would allow and what this would not. The way that we two have been working together to try to craft this is it creates a baseline. And then baseline can then be changed up or down through the conditional use process to allow more or less for venues, because as you talked about, each venue needs neighborhood and space can be a little bit different. The baseline that it starts with is if you were approved through the conditional use process, the baseline would be 3 days a week. We would allow you to have to finish the venue outdoor entertainment by 10. And so that sort of creates that, and you could, I talked to a friend and colleague from Trinity today, and she was telling me, I think this is way too restrictive, right? We gotta be able to do more. And in this case, then you can do this process, you can create space where you can do more. You might have a place that is next door, it's like, we love it on Sunday afternoons, but we can't handle this on a Tuesday night. Well, you can use this process to then say, all right, we have this venue that you have, X days a week and X times, and everybody agrees with it. And that works. And then it doesn't create that predictability that you can have performances at this time. As you're booking it, as you're performing it, as you do next year. But you may have places like, we're cool with this place having music 7 days a week till 2 a.m. Great. We can figure out the process of music rep. That can happen. But again, neither of those are the base. Those can be decided throughout this process if everyone can agree with it, if you can come to that. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit too is the enforcement question comes up a lot. And you really talked about the binary aspect of it, right? If you cut off at 10 and someone's still having, a show at 11 p.m., they violated it. And what it does is, you don't have to have a decibel rating to say, you're at 97 decibels and you can do X amount. Because that there's either performance or there's not. It's been also pushed up to you can use other type of enforcement. Instead of having someone that does the lead, someone that does, say, Airbnb enforcement also can look at that and say, we see that they're having their outside of everything, so we can do this as a cross sort of enforcement agency that could actually work with this. Because at the point, this is not, it's not that we allow this to happen, and also when every venue in the city suddenly has music outside all the time. I think some people would love it, and some people would understand that, right? And so neither of those things are that going to happen. We probably will have, maybe dozens of places at most that will level up, and so that's also easy within to actually keep track of. And so we can do a lot of there. So there's a lot of things that are built in that address a lot of people's concerns. Because as I keep saying, this works only if it really does work for everybody.
I'm gonna come to this gentleman, then I'm coming up front.
I got a couple of general questions. My name is Andy Levin. I live on South Rampart Street. I've got 3 possible places within 1 block of me that might have live music. I've got a very large amphitheater across the street, which is basically the Central City Barbecue. It's got a huge stage. I've got the Paradigm Gardens, who are my neighbors, who I get along very well with right now. And I've got the Rabbit Hole in back of me. So 3 within 1 block of me. I've had some issues with the Rabbit Hole. They've been good to work with. Paradigm Gardens, the same thing. My concern is, if this passes, whether my ability to work with these people will be greater or lesser, how it will be applied, and who will have the final say. If I've got a guy across the street with a huge stage who wants to have music 3 times a week now, I know most of you all are musicians here, so you understand what a subwoofer is, and you know what subwoofers do, okay? So with a subwoofer and a sound guy, and we all know about sound guys too because we're musicians, right? You never know what you're going to get. That subwoofer will travel in the ground for blocks. It'll end up in your house. And that kind of experience wouldn't wish on anybody. I don't know how many of you have lived in proximity to a venue like that and been exposed to it. And I don't care if you're a musician or who you are. As a matter of fact, the musician is life likely. You want to have that pounding in the ear, but will drive you crazy. So this is why people are hesitant. The other reason is you see these mobile sound systems going around. You can hear a car with subwoofer. You know what I'm talking about. So, issues of, I want to be able to have input into what's going on around me, and I want to know who is having the final say. And I think it's really important to have regulations about the type of sound equipment that can be used. And it's extremely important to control the amount of sound. You simply can't say, well, you can have music, because that could mean anything. So there have to be strict controls over what kind of sound system is used and how it's applied. That for certain.
Yeah, first off, most of what I'm doing this week and what the last few weeks have been taking in, sort of information, hearing out people, and incorporating it into the work we're doing. One of the things I want to point out of your situation specifically, as it currently stands, none of those locations have had to submit any type of plans or any type of, in advance, address you as a neighbor for what they're doing. For the most part, they get to go and seek something if it's an outdoor circumstance.
That's right, but they have to stop at 10.
Right, so in this circumstance that we're describing, first of all, they would have to talk to you in advance and present to you a series of plans about what they intend to do, how to abate, whether it's sound, how to abate circumstances around outdoor live entertainment. They don't have to ask you at all about that. They can do it, and on the back end, you might have to complain. In the case of what we're describing, is they're going to need to seek this community input on the front end, which would allow you deep, tailored knowledge about what they intend to do and how it would work for your neighborhood.
Who's going to get the final say? Is it my city council person, or?
So you'll actually have several bites at the apple, right? So the very first thing that any conditional use needs to do is it needs to have a neighborhood participation process, where they kind of solicit from neighbors and from people who live near some information about what y'all want to see and what your concerns would be. Then there's going to be a city planning hearing, a public hearing, where once again, not only will that information be portrayed both to staff and to the commissioners, but also you'll be able to attend as a neighbor and literally voice any concerns you might have with their plan and what they intend to do. And then the city council will also have a hearing, at least one. I would suspect they probably have two. We would probably have two hearings in some cases, where there'd be a committee and then a regular council hearing on specific conditional uses regarding specific locations. That's three big public bites at the apple that you would have to, if you think 10 p.m. is too late, for instance, and you want to see 9, and you and every neighbor around you wants to see 9, they're going to be hard-pressed for your commissioners and then your elected officials to kind of ignore what neighbors are. And I think ultimately, one of the important things about conditional uses is, and I articulate this in a lot of different venues, is that there are many authorities that the council, the city has on the books, and one of the problems is we don't use them. And one of the interesting things about conditional uses is that they are conditioned. They're conditioned on your behavior using whatever privilege you've been given.
I got that one, and you think you answered the question. The next question is density. Is there anything in the legislation that's being presented to the city council, whatever, about density?
Well, the issue of density is inherent in any community-driven process, right? One of the things I think we're really concerned about is trying to find one-size-fit-all circumstances to really unique, bespoke issues. And what I would say is, in your case, you don't necessarily live in the Treme or adjacent to the French Quarter and the Bridgwater, or necessarily uptown. There are all different considerations in every neighborhood. So the density question is really going to be served through the community engagement process.
It's a really important question. We want the venues that exist now, like the Broadside of this place, to go on. We want to make sure that what we have now, that our musicians will, because it's extremely important to me that musicians have a place to play and get paid fairly. That's a whole other issue of, do we allow people to play with tips and clubs? If we're really talking about supporting the musicians, there's a lot of other things that can be done besides having them play outside. So,
I totally agree. I think he's saying there's many other things to do to support musicians, which we absolutely agree with.
Right.
But in this context, one of the things I just want to say, we're dealing with a very narrow piece of, I think, the cultural economy and culture in the city, but we're dealing with a piece that I think is important for the future of culture in the city, and it's also important to sustain the tradition
What happens
of
if
culture.
it, what happens if it fails? What about Broadside? What about these venues right now? What if it fails?
What if the Broads? I'm not sure.
What if this doesn't pass? Which is not. It's probably won't
Well,
pass. What's
that's
gonna
why
happen?
we're doing this work. I mean, we don't want to see any of these places fail.
What happens if it doesn't pass?
I'm sorry?
What happens if this doesn't pass?
Well, currently, as it stands right now, I think Ethan spoke to this, Alexis and Arsène have all said, look, right now is kind of, no one really knows what the rules are. Ethan has noted that some city departments think these COVID sort of issuances of permits are still in play. Some don't think that. We don't know when the emergency powers will end. We think that that's one of the purposes of this is to standardize and create predictability so that no one is guessing 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, what are the rules?
So one thing I would add to that, and I'm not going to Alexis, is if this doesn't pass, I think largely what's going to happen is almost all the outdoor spaces will go away because slowly, little by little, their permits will not be renewed, they won't be able to do it, and so these places that sprung up will slowly not be able to continue to function to get the permits to continue. And those are the ones that are trying to play by the rules because they're trying to get the permits. What I think will happen if this doesn't pass is all the people trying to do it right won't be able to continue, and all the people that are just going to do it are just going to continue to do it, so you're going to get the worst and not the best.
That's New Orleans. Sounds about right.
Whatever. So the part of these does is creates an avenue that you can support some people doing it right, as well as also create something that people are not doing it right to create a way to put some restrictions on that and limit that.
I was just going to add that the process that was here before COVID and what we had to do sort of during was this get a special event permit, which is a very limited amount you get in the annual period. They're very expensive and they're really weird. You can tell from the application to something like unbelievable or something. So you're trying to fill out this form, pay this exorbitant thing to have, maybe get it approved and be able to have one event. So
Maybe get it approved and at the last minute, which puts stressors on everyone involved.
It's anything that the city gets involved with generates into that. And I hate to say that, but I've had dealings with them on many occasions that are much simpler than this, and the process becomes so complicated because they simply can't do their job, and there's no one to recognize it. For example, permits department is not functional. So anybody who says they're going to do anything that requires the permits department, it is not going to work. So we have to deal with the reality of our city as well, and that's one of the realities.
So I'm gonna come. We've got 3 more questions in a very limited time. I know this is a very extensive and very in-depth conversation, but I've got 3 more people, and I know we're trying to wrap up at 7. So we got about 15 more minutes. I got 3 people coming around. If you do have additional questions, if I don't get to you, please make sure you hit those note cards on the table, please. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Anne Marie Coviello. I've got a couple of quick statements. As a music lover, I've witnessed a lot of clubs close. And I've also seen people who've made it. I'm also a huge quality of life person, so I really play for both sides. It's not 2 sides against each other. I went through very intimately with Chris Rudge the fight over MaCCNO. And I was also there when Little People's got shut down. So I've seen Donna's never came back. I can list a lot, but then I also talk about Vaughn's, and I married into the Oak Street family, Snake and Jake's. And yet so I think one piece is to know the history. Another piece is to get with these elders, get with Cindy, get with Hank, from Maybe, get with the elders, and get with Donna. Donna's around. What would have made it work? Get with Pat and Sam. I don't know if both of them are still alive. But you can get with Buffy and talk about what happened to Little People's. There's a justice piece of this, because MaCCNO lived and Little People's didn't. And Donna's never came back. And there was a lot of issues in that. But what I would also say is I love what everybody said about when I heard you say the word bespoke, I was like Snake and Jake's and bespoke in the same thought bubble. We need to craft this minutely but simply. It can be simple enough. I think the most simple will be the best. We all know I'm a zoning nerd too, and they never follow the zoning rules in the city, and they don't follow the simple things like letting people know. Like, a very simple thing is like, if you are getting, if someone in your neighborhood applies for a zoning variance, you're supposed to see a notice, and we very infrequently do. So keep it simple, realistic. I want to echo what everybody said about, like, the city is broken. It's not functioning. We live in a failed state. But we also have these great pockets of great successes. And so we want to like celebrate that and go to those people, and also keep it simple and keep it like flexible and know the history and keep it fair. And I think that the biggest thing, like if we have anything to guide us, it is, and I'm sure the owners and the musicians would not like this as much, but it really played out in the fight for MaCCNO. Listen to the neighbors. Not one person came to the city council and spoke. There were people lined up out the door to speak in favor of what Chris Rudge was doing, and not one person, including the person who called the police and started the whole thing, showed up to say, and I can't imagine it's very easy to live next door to MaCCNO. So I think there's lessons to be learned.
Appreciate that. So what I got from it is make sure that you're actually talking to your cultural elders, make sure that you're actually talking to your neighbors. And I think that's at the end of the day what we should be doing, right? If we're talking about from a community standpoint. So.
Hey, so when we started MaCCNO back in the day, and your shirt says it, I want to make it really simple, music is not a crime. When, I hate to be like political, but like party system here, you got like Republicans and Democrats are never like, yeah, well, let's be really apologetic about stuff, and Republicans keep going through and smashing stuff down. There's the law. Make that the law. Music is not a crime. You can play music 7 a.m. in the morning, 2 a.m. I don't care. Play music. Be creative. Stop. Simple. Music's not a crime in New Orleans. You don't want to be here? Everybody comes in, they're 20 years old. We're partying, 5 a.m. Passion it out. Woohoo! They turn 36, they have a family. Like, not in my backyard anymore. Stop that. If you don't want to be at the party no more, don't be at the party. Make our city free. Freedom, music's not a crime.
Mic drop. With our 10th anniversary, just so that y'all know, MaCCNO.com, we have those shirts available from small to extra large. Thank you.
My name is Dina Ziggy. I'm a local hearing instrument specialist. I've been on the governing board for the hearing aid dealers, and I'm a chapter president of our hearing aid society. And I wanted to say, yes, music is not a crime. We're all in agreement, but decibel levels can not only hurt residential neighbors as well as the actual musicians. So when we start talking about protecting our musicians and musician health, we have to think about the sound abatement. And I think some of the sound ordinances in place to have the doors and windows closed is because they don't want it leaking out. And it shouldn't be played excessively loud indoors, because I have seen so many musicians in their 30s and 40s coming in with hearing loss. It is unreal. So when you discuss limiting time, limiting days, and sound abatement, can you elaborate on the sound abatement portion that you might recommend to the council?
Sure. So just I want to add that, our use standards require compliance with the current sound ordinance as well, not just abatement plans, but also compliance with the ordinance that is in place today. That's this model use standards. The issue around sound abatement, I think, is often sort of, it's a very difficult sort of where you measure, who you're talking to, where you are, type of thing. One of the things we want to make sure all of these rules about every venue are, is that flexibility thing is really important. And I think we have some buffers that are used in the uses that create some space. We have that requirement of the plan. Ultimately, I think this will create a better scenario than what we have today, where no one has to enter a plan, no one has to say anything about what they're going to do, other than in that immediacy. And I think predictability creates the intentionality around venues that want to do outdoor live entertainment are going to be much more thoughtful about how they design long-term if I was a business owner, I would probably be more interested if I could get a predictable set of outdoor live entertainment sort of standards. I could then invest in opportunities to make my outdoor live entertainment venue better, not just better for my business, but better for my neighbors. When you create ad hoc adventures, you're going to get ad hoc results. And I think predictable results create predictable venue spaces, predictable circumstances for people to do investments, make sure their business can survive, but also thrive, and thrive under the rules that we create, and thrive that the community can both love it and realize that like we've done the work we need to do to mitigate circumstances that might concern a community, but also create those spaces where everybody's sort of like on a long-term, like sort of comfort level, right? And so I think I would just add, as Ethan's pointed out, you get the worst actors in the most lawless circumstances. And the more and better rules and standards we can put in place, the more and better operators, the more and better investments that people will make in their venue, and the more and better sort of circumstances that neighbors will have.
I would also talk, because there's some movements and this comes up a lot in this discussion about that. And part of the issue is there's a lot of politics, for better or worse, that are involved in the way the noise and sound ordinance works. And there was a long process that tried to update it. And that started in like 2010 and went to 2014, 2015, and it failed. Right? It never got updated. And so if we're going to start a process to update the noise ordinance, it has to come from the community. It has to be a long process. And I would say that is likely being generous, the 18-month long process to get to a resolution. It took 4 or 5 years last time it failed. And there's no guarantee that it wouldn't fail again. And so what we're also, as we talk about this, trying to do is create ways that we can continue these opportunities, but create other ways to enforce it without just talking to that, because there's so much inherent in that process. Not saying that it never will be updated, never happening, but saying you've got to do that first is basically saying we're never going to deal with this, because this is years down the line. I'm already 2.5 years into a pandemic, and we know it's necessary. So we got to get these spaces available and get it done. Will we figure that out? So I think people are thinking about that, and I also say one thing I would love to do, and I'm going to put this out in the world so if someone wants to work on this with us and fund it, is if we can get this ordinance done, we can actually invest in some of these outdoor spaces, right? One thing we talk about a lot is imagine if you can take some of these outdoor spaces and really be a little for sound management and also water management, and create these great sort of outdoor places that are really doing a lot of things that everybody talks about we want the owners to do. And that's possible if we can get over this hump, right? If we can stop debating about whether it's loud or it's not, we'll get what we can. If we can get that baseline in, then we can start really investing in creating some of these world-class great spaces that everybody knows we want the ones to be. We just can't do it yet because we're stuck on this back and forth all the time. So let's get this done, get past that back and forth, and start really creating the city and the spaces that we want.
Good evening. My name is Ryan. I live in the 2200 block of Ellestad, in Central City, just not too far from where we are now. Some of you guys know who I am because you've seen me in this city, and so I have to agree. I have to give a shout out to this guy here who is saying free everything. But I think also I was talking to my man here, my man who like Michael McDonald behind me. About how does this look? We talk about, this whole good neighbor thing, because everyone has a different definition of what a good neighbor is. Like, a good neighbor could be someone who picks up the trash, has their music down, who has their music set to a respectable level where everyone isn't distracted. But I want to know this question. If this passes, let's say I live here in Central City, on Friday, let's say for example on Friday through Sunday, the last band should be done by like 11 o'clock at night, and in the quarter it should be done at 1 a.m. Will the curfews and those restrictions, will they be done on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, or will it be a uniform basis? That's what I want to answer.
I love the podcast. Also, what I would like to say is that this process creates specifically better than neighborhood by neighborhood, venue by venue tailoring around those types of questions. So you don't even have to say where you live. You can, like, about your neighborhood, you can talk about your street, your community, your direct community. And I think that's ultimately the best way to do this, as people have mentioned, tailoring it to venues, to really, really micro communities that give people that access and that engagement, I think makes the best product at the end.
Any other questions, y'all? What you gonna say? You gonna plug our shirt again?
Oh yeah.
All right.
But more than the shirt, can we go ahead and just start pushing people out who don't want to be here? Like, let's lower the housing prices, get housing back in there. We have enough people who want to be here, who have trouble being here. If you don't want to be here, if you can't take the noise, there's a lot of other places.
We'll be passing a law to lower housing prices tomorrow.
Great.
Take care of that, no problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, pump up the music, pump up the party. This thing about like the quarter maybe shutting down at 1.
Oh, the quarter maybe shut down.
Exactly.
That's why it's not going to pass.
But yeah, the New Orleans doesn't shut down. I have my neighbor, like my next door neighbor, I'm not allowed to talk outside of my house. That is the noise ordinance of my block.
You should get a conditional use, man.
I know, I'm not allowed to talk. Well, I get yelled at if I talk outside of my house. So.
You do have a loud voice though, bro.
Well, as y'all heard, healthy housing is a human right, and this is certainly a democratic process at the end of the day. Obviously, we're not going to agree on everything, but we want to be able to make sure that we're hearing various perspectives. Another question.
With the deepest respect, I'm a New Yorker. I've lived here for 8 years, and the biggest lesson and the biggest takeaway that I get from New Orleans is community. Bigger than music, because as y'all were saying before, live performance is more than music. The biggest thing that I see in New Orleans is community. And community coming together for the goal of keeping the culture alive. And I think there's room for everyone with that goal to be a community together. That's all I would like to say.
All right, y'all, I think we got time for one more question. We're getting close to that 7 o'clock.
Can I just say one small thing, which usually Arsène is famous for saying, and just a small reminder that we also live here and reside here. I've been here 25 years. You know, I don't know if everybody's seen it. We also are part of the community. We're not just in there from being business or being a musician, but we live here.
So I'm going to, we talk a lot, and we've done this work, Arsène, this is our 10th year, and often these things that are in the context of musicians versus residents, right? That's such a false context to be under, because everyone here is a resident, right? We all, and to your point, Lauren, until we all live here, we need to figure this out. But it's a false dichotomy to say this is always musicians versus residents or business versus residents, because we are all residents here. That's why we keep putting on this point, is we need to make sure that this works for everyone. And that means it works for the musicians, for the venues, and for the neighbors, and for someone that, may not never go to any venue. It needs to be able to work for them as well, as much as it needs to be someone that wants to be, in the quarter at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. as well, right? So let's figure out this way that we can make it work. It's not one size fits all, but we are one community here, so we need to make sure that all of us are represented in this solution.
Yeah, and the only thing I want to add on to that is that, by coming up with regulations that everyone can live by, ultimately we're doing a job of protecting a culture that exists nowhere else on this planet. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the deep South Louisiana. So if we can't have the culture, the music, the art here in our city, it can't live in Metairie, it can't live in Elmwood, it has to be here. And so I think we have to think about that ultimately, that is the number one thing. Giving more opportunities to musicians, artists, culture bearers to hone their crafts, to share their wealth. But ultimately, the fact of the matter is that everyone lives here.
So
Hello, I might be teeing up the last question here. So, when is the vote, and what can we do to help?
I love that question. That's the best question. So let me try to explain a little bit about the quick process piece. So like I mentioned, the last few weeks we've been doing a lot of community events, a lot of conversations, hearing out so many people across the city. So this next week is a big week. So let me try to give you a couple opportunities to weigh in. We would really love to have your comments and your support on this on Wednesday, July 20th. Wednesday, July 20th, the Economic Development Committee, which is chaired by my boss, Council President Moreno, will consider the motion that's sitting in front of us today, which just does as I described, and I'll be happy to provide copies of to whomever wants to read a zoning motion. It will be posted on our council website on Monday. The council will consider it on the 20th. Again, great vibes will be very helpful that day. So if you can do two things. You can attend the council meeting, the committee meeting will be at 10 a.m. at City Council Chambers, 1300 Presidio. If you have trouble finding it, I'll help you. But if you don't or can't attend, you can live stream it. Everything is streamed live, council.nola.gov/live. You can watch any council hearing, and you can also make public comment virtually starting 24 hours plus before the meeting, so probably starting on Monday evening. There'll be a public comment link, and all you have to do is click on the committee hearing, and there's a quick way to just put in your comment, write it up, put your name and address, and that'll be really helpful. And those comments will be read unless they are voluminous. We had 30 hours of comment on our abortion resolution 2 weeks ago. That was a lot. We didn't read 30 hours, but we will read a significant amount, as much as we can. And so that's one opportunity. So number one is economic development, 7:20, 10 a.m. Number two will likely be the full council meeting on Thursday, July 21st, the next day. We don't have a time for the council hearing. Always meets at 10 a.m. starting on that Thursday. I don't have a specific time for this. There's time between now and then for me to say this isn't true, but as of right now, we intend to consider this motion on Thursday, July 21st. That's the big vote. That's the vote when this motion would, if approved, would direct planning and law to come up with a specific ordinance that would effectuate this change. I know it sounds like a two-step process. It is a two-step process, but once the motion is in motion, we're basically on our way to victory. So I just want to highlight those two opportunities again. The full council meeting has the same rules. You can do public virtual comment up until 8 a.m. on July 21st. So you can attend in person if you like going to things in person. I can see everyone in this room likes to go to events in person. But some people don't, and some people also are not available during the day. So you may make virtual comment. That virtual comment link also opens on Monday. So there'll be two virtual comment links. You can put the same comment, a different comment. You can try to trick me by putting one different word and see if I notice. But you can do whatever you like on that virtual comment, or show up twice. I love to see your smiling faces and speaking in favor of hopefully this opportunity to create a long-term, predictable, accountable place for our cultural economy, to cultural fairs, or our musicians, or all our entertainers, all our cultural community to express ourselves outside at venues who've gone through this conditional use process. So the 20th and the 21st, it's all next week. The 2-night stand.
If you found out about this via our email or social media, you'll absolutely be hearing about this from our email and social media again. So yeah, that's one thing I'll say. I'm just going to say, when this passes, right, we need your comments to make sure that it does. It also is just creating a baseline, so there will be other parts of conditional use. There will be chances we know that something citywide may need some tweaks to make sure as we go through the process. We also need further input, but the real thing is to make sure it passes, and then we can start figuring out if there's other things that need to be adjusted along the way. I also want to, before we go to anybody else, wants to close a comment or say anything that we may have missed.
Hi, y'all. So, just in closing, yes, I am a musician. I'm the 13th generation. No one living. I'm a resident, and I do understand there's common ground that can be found. As this ordinance exists right now, it is deeply based in restrictive policies that were put in place in an attempt to control the very people who historically have been making music here. And it's time to undo that harm. However, we can do that by by creating community, and by creating community means everybody's input needs to come in, everyone needs to engage. As many people as we can get, the critical mass has to engage in this. And I do believe that we can have instances where there are outdoor venues where people are able to safely have shows, whether it be music, whether it be theater, burlesque, as we continue through this pandemic and even afterwards, so that when we come back to these situations, clearly this isn't going to be the last pandemic that we have, but clearly being outside is a safe space. And once we pass this, going back to what Ethan said, because this is something that I have pushed for the past 4 or 5 years, because I'm also part of Waterwise Gulf South and have been deeply involved in stormwater management and green infrastructure. And we can have all of it. We can have venues that are these lush green spaces that actually deal with the stormwater management that we have, because New Orleans specifically, just very quickly, New Orleans specifically has a concrete problem. And if we get rid of that concrete and put more green stuff in there, we're going to address sound abatement issues, sound ordinance issues, of neighbors being able to hear things, but also the very real issue of climate change that all of us are experiencing right now.
All right, y'all. Just a very quick recap. Next Wednesday, 10 a.m., Economic Development Subcommittee meeting, and then Thursday, we don't know the time yet, but please make sure if you have not, that you sign up. We will make sure, MaCCNO will make sure to get that out in an upcoming newsletter in regards to the full council vote for outdoor live entertainment. Appreciate y'all coming out on a rainy Thursday evening. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to y'all for coming out. Thanks to Zony for hosting us. Y'all have a wonderful evening.
Thanks.